Hello, this is Gary Van Warmerdam with the Awareness and Consciousness podcast from pathwaytohappiness.com. And I'm here with Daniel Moore, who's
Hello.
going to help me facilitate a conversation. And today's topic is conflict. Because I know you've got a conflict going on in your country, but that's
Yes.
not just where I want to leave it. And you had mentioned you're uncomfortable talking about it.
I'm comfortable and happy for the growth opportunity.
Right, right. And I I want to talk about it two reasons. A, so we see and understand kind of the more layers of what's going on causing conflict. We see what needs to happen for peace to happen. And that doesn't just mean a conflict between nation states. It means a conflict with political parties, because we have plenty of that. Conflict between people, you and your partner in relationship. And applies also to the conflict with yourself. So I think there's parallels with all of it. So And the other reason I want to talk about it is because it's uncomfortable, and I think it helps to demonstrate, well, to resolve things, we need to have conversations that are uncomfortable. And we need to have them in a way that's helpful and move things forward out of the conflict instead of trying to resolve, conflict by violence. We need to show up to the table and say things that are uncomfortable. We need to be in touch with things that are uncomfortable and hear things that are uncomfortable and not react with, we're going to have reactions to what we hear someone say about us or people we care about or the side we're on, the group we're in, but to be present with that and not let it take us over. That's important to resolve conflict. So, yeah, and I'll tell you that this conversation is uncomfortable for me because it's very easy when you make a statement about a conflict to be seen as taking a side. And as soon as that happens, everybody who's on the other side of the conflict sees you as the enemy. They want to compartmentalize you. And you see that with the narratives, say, with what's going on in the country. Uh, you say something that is against a certain group of human beings or pro a certain group of human beings. And everybody's for or against that group is agreeing with you or disagreeing with you as if that's makes you a part of their tribe and believes everything that, and then they assume you believe everything they believe and are fighting for all the same causes and against the same causes that they are for. And it's like, no, that's not the point I was trying to make. So the jumping to conclusions that happens, almost is like ammunition for everybody to have more verbal conflict back and forth. So it's why, I'm tentative about having a conversation that's in public. But let's start the conversation with the difficulty of having a conversation being that. So,
Okay. And I appreciate you. Maybe if we reframe that, because I know for you, it's not about saying something against or for a group of people, but it could be just something that contradicts certain people's beliefs or way of seeing life, but it doesn't mean that you're against them.
mhm, correct.
It's just different in what they believe.
I see, yeah, if somebody asks my opinion, so well, I see, if I start and say, well, I see this group of human beings has committed this atrocious violent acts. Now, that might be a statement of fact, but people's minds can jump to, Well, there was very good reason for it, and defend it, or other people's minds might jump to, yes, and that was horrific and unjust. Great. Now we have a verbal conflict about why, the cause, the motivations, who was just, who was unjust, which are belief systems and points of view. Um, and if we're, and to engage in a conversation at that level, the science and data is that if you oppose somebody's beliefs, even if you present them facts, a person's belief system actually discounts any evidence or facts. And the mind reinforces and defends its particular narrative against fact or against even opposing belief or opposing opinions. So what you've done is, by presenting an opposing side as somebody who's unconscious, their belief system gets stronger and more entrenched. So it's called a pushback or something like that that happens in belief
Yes,
systems.
yes.
So why engage in a conversation that might involve taking side that's just going to entrench people deeper into a narrative story? No, thank you.
Yeah, and that creates more polarization,
Yeah.
which we want to do the opposite of.
Yeah. So I understand why a lot of people would refrain from even commenting about it. But makes it difficult to have a conversation. We'll then resolve it, or let's work through. So that's kind of the top layer. Like can't have a conversation until we get through the fear and uncomfortableness about having a conversation, right?
So that's what we're starting with.
Yeah. And that applies to your partner and your children. If you're afraid to bring something up, okay, well, then you need to work through the fear of bringing it up and fear of their reaction to your comment, you know, before you can address the issue. That's the issue that's on top. So what's your hesitancy and uncomfortableness about having this discussion,
Mm,
besides being in the middle of it?
well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
I don't think I have hesitancy. I wouldn't say I have hesitancy. I think uncomfortableness would be to the uncomfortableness, I like it, first of all, is to just look at maybe my own biases and grow past them. Or I actually like the uncomfortableness because I want to see the situation in a more holistic way,
Hmm.
maybe more of a bird's eye view or a deeper point of view of it. And that could be uncomfortable for parts of me that are identified with certain stories, cultural stories, and beliefs I grew up with.
Hmm.
And also with there's also a fear for me, or for a part of me, there's a fear that shows up that I live here, I have family, I have people I care about here, care about this place. I have a fear that shows up for me when people present perhaps a story that something me perceives as threatening for the safety of like the country I live in, because it promotes a narrative that could threaten that.
Hmm.
And so that's a reaction that shows up.
Perceiving that, yeah, you can create a conflict between friends and family, because, yeah, you have a different point of view or belief system, even though you're just two human beings trying to get along in the world.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
and
it's
mostly
like
with
you
like
don't want
other
to
people or
exaggerate or create a larger potential conflict. Yeah.
but I feel kind of happy to talk about this, actually. I like this.
Yeah. Let's start with the fact that it's going to be uncomfortable.
And maybe can I add for people listening, something that could be really fruitful is to observe your mind and what shows up inside you as we have this conversation, because you may have reactions showing up inside your mind. And that would be really fruitful and transforming if you observe that and kind of see, oh, here's my mind reacting, or it's attached to some opinion or some story or has a fear. That could be transformational when listening to this conversation.
Yeah. So we'll talk about the nature of a conflict and how it kind of escalates. I mean, why people are killing each other sometimes. And I mean, there's a lot of layers to it. And undoubtedly, everybody wants it to stop and wants it to be peaceful. And yet they're not doing that. They're actually escalating violence and peace and killing people, um, more threatening words, statements to scare each other, which is in the opposite direction. It produces the opposite. So it kind of doesn't make sense unless you look at, what else is going on here. So let's talk about like at a belief system level. The belief in a conflict in kind of an oppressive force is usually something along the nature of, if I hurt you bad enough, you'll stop doing what you're doing. If I hurt you bad enough, you'll be scared of me and you will stay away and you'll let me be. Okay. And this is basically imposing our will through whether it's violence or a parent shaming a child, scolding them. I'm going to hurt you emotionally. Okay. To their behavior changes.
Well, can we take that back even? I think before that, there's a belief, I'm afraid to be hurt by you, or maybe I feel hurt by you. So I want to make sure that doesn't happen again or won't happen. So I'm going to hurt you so you don't do that to me.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Why would I need to be such a level of perpetrator and hurt you? Only if A, you've hurt me, or I'm afraid of you hurting me. You know,
Exactly.
and this goes to parents who are frustrated with their children, because they're too loud at the grocery store or having a temper tantrum, and they're now frustrated. They lose it because there's like that is painful emotionally to have your child out of control and you can't things done, and now it's moving later in the day and you're going to interfere with something else. Frustration. Or a country that says, wow, I'm afraid of you. You might have nuclear weapons, weapons of mass destruction, so I'm going to have to invade you first. Okay, which has happened.
I know. I know what you're.
Happened, right?
And that's what's happening here.
Yeah,
Well, not now, but
yeah,
the whole, if I don't know if you want to speak about that, but the whole Israeli narrative that's always been is like, we're afraid, Israel is like afraid that there'll be a Palestinian country because they're afraid that would mean they will get stronger and attack Israel, right? That's the belief. So it's like, we're gonna prevent that.
mm-hmm.
But I don't know if funny, but the logic about that to me, doesn't hold too much because
Okay, yeah,
that creates conflicts.
right. So now I'm gonna hurt you. I'm gonna oppress you. Becomes a narrative. An underlying belief system, if you look at it, is, well, I'll hurt you so bad, or I'll make you so weak, I'll make you so afraid with my violence, my threats, my killing of some of your people, that uh, you'll stay away, you'll give me respect, you'll do what I say, you won't do the behavior I don't want. And we learned this. Think about where we learned this kind of oppressive aggression, right? We learned it as kids. We saw it modeled with parents. And it works with children. Because as an adult, if your child is 2 and 4 and 6 years old, you can overwhelm them, right? I mean, even if it comes to physical force, you can break their will, make it so painful for them to disobey that they obey, and they'll do it for years. So we've had it happen to us. Our parents, thank God, my parents didn't let my temper tantrums control them, right? And somehow, whatever, and I don't remember, they put a stop to it, or they calmed me down, or whatever they did. They nurtured me, or, well, my dad's thing was he pulled me by the ear and was like, well, I'm going with him. I'm going to lose my ear, right? And my mom would, after, she wouldn't have to go get the wooden spoon. She would go, do I need to go get the wooden spoon? And, like, that was enough to, like, we were going to go do what she said. So, but that doesn't work when I'm 18, when I'm 20, when I'm 25, and I've grown up and I have a sense of agency. I want what other people have. I want fairness and justice. I don't want to live under the rule of law of parents and whatever their method is. And I don't want to live under other people. So our rebellion towards freedom and independence will be dormant for a while. And for some people, their whole life, they're like, that's the way the powers that be would go along. And at another level, some people, like, it hits a sense of maybe even integrity. Like, this is unfair. I don't want to live by somebody else's authority or oppression. What do I have to do to be free of it? So now this person is trying to impose a will that worked for parents and it works on them, and they've repeated it within the narrative society and culture, and they've seen it work other places, maybe for their whole generation. I was listening to a podcast about the history of India. India lived under British rule for generations.
How long was it?
And
100 or a bit over 100 years?
probably a couple hundred years. I don't remember the dates.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, maybe 350 years. Maybe less. Um, oppression of Black Americans. First slavery, and then then they emancipated from the 1865-ish, 1860-ish Civil War. Okay, got rid of slavery, but then the South imposed all sorts of peonage, and slavery became just laws of peonage where it imprisoned blacks and made them slave labor as prisoners for another 100 years. It was actually even worse in some ways. Okay. And so people fighting for that, yeah, sometimes it's dormant, sometimes the fight comes out in different ways. So, but if you see that it works for a long time, you will think, oh, this will work. You have selective evidence, but you're not expanding your awareness to see that is a human being with its own sense of right and wrong and justice and fairness and a sense of wanting freedom to live as they please and have opportunity as they please. And that is a strong force. that fear of consequences may not stop. And so now they'll do whatever it takes. So this notion that you can oppress or violently scare somebody into submission, it's adulthood, is a false belief. But it's undercurrent to like the thinking that enables the decision towards conflict and violence as a solution.
Absolutely. And it doesn't work. And I think there's a level of like, then that the side that has the power is afraid of the other side getting power. Like if I think of the uh, African Americans and the white people, I think they were must have been really afraid of them
Always,
getting power because they're afraid they'll lose their power.
always,
And so they want to oppress so they don't lose
always,
power and status.
always, because somewhere is in their conscious or unconscious is the awareness what we've done. And a lot of it's has to be repressed because you don't want to deal with that kind of shame and guilt. So you repress that. But there's awareness what we've done, maybe for generations, maybe for 100 years. And we're like, if we take the shackles off these people, if we really give them their freedom, they become empowered. All of that trauma that we've inflicted on them for generations, that's there as pain, it will want to come out as anger and retribution. All that energy, if it's freed up, if they get their freedom, they'll also have this explosion of anger and probably a seeking of justice. And so the perpetrator unconsciously or somewhat consciously is like afraid to let that happen
Right.
because of their innate sense of we deserve what we would be getting. It makes total sense a human being would treat us that way of the way we fear because of what we've done to them.
And
So
they'll expect that.
so their fear then feeds the fuel towards being perpetually a perpetrator and a villain of their own story, and then have to lie and deny and say, oh, but there's good reason for it. We have to do this because they're violent people. Well, there's a violent bit of trauma that's needs to be addressed in there as well. And that's part of, if you're going to have peace, you're like, okay, we need to address this
Which it
layer
hasn't
of
been.
the belief system and behavior. No, it hasn't been.
Not in the US, like nowhere. Hasn't been emotionally addressed.
There is a place.
Maybe in some places, yeah.
I think South Africa, this was one of the great concerns when Nelson Mandela was negotiating, freedom and being free of apartheid rule. The whites knew that they were outnumbered. They knew they'd committed atrocities and they were scared. And there had to be the kinds of conversations, and they had concerns Mandela would want to create a big uprising and have some kind of retribution that would put a lot or all of them in jail. And so it took a long time for them, the conversation, like, wow, this man is not angry. This man is composed. And that they could trust Mandela is going to lead this and not bring about like that vengeance that wants to come out. And what he did instead, what they all did instead, is they had an honest conversation in the form of truth and reconciliation commissions. They had the uncomfortable conversations. And they had it essentially in a kind of court where essentially the perpetrators came out and said, this is what we did. And there was peace could be made that way, where you're honest having an uncomfortable conversation. This is what I did. And it also relieves them of this burden of shame, of guilt, of having treated other human beings this way. A kind of release of, I don't have to bury and hide this. You know, because if you're going to create peace, and you need to create peace inside the individual, they need to come to terms with what we've done as an aggressor. I need to come to terms with what my aggressor has done with me, and let go of my urge to fight, to kill, to punish them back. You know, to get peace, you have to have those uncomfortable conversations about those impulses and urges and emotions. You know, you don't want to bury it because it festers. You know, I had a conversation with my mom years ago. She grew up in Holland during World War II, German occupation when she was a kid. And my grandfather, her father, was part of the Dutch underground. And she was tell us stories when we were a kid. They were the coolest stories about, you know, hiding people in the barn under the haystack, and Germans come looking for them, and hiding guns, and printing counterfeit script so that other people could eat. So, uh, but she said sometimes was the decision that there would be a Dutch family down the road that was collaborating with the Germans, and maybe they knew too much. The Dutch underground would go and kill one of the neighbors. And she went to school with the kid. And so the Dutch underground would go kill one of their own Dutch members of the community that was collaborating. And then she remembers after the war going to school with that kid and knowing that her dad, my grandfather, was part of the decision making to have him killed. I was like, did you tell anybody? She's like, oh no, you never told anybody what you knew about that. So she buried it inside. Neighbor kid buried it inside. That's not healthy.
No,
So if you want peace, if you want peace inside, you've got to deal with that layer of emotion and what we did, what I did, what they did, and make your peace with it somewhere to get to a peaceful settlement. And that's a lot of emotional work. That's a lot of trauma cleaning. That's a lot of changing point of view and narrative story. You have to completely step out of what is your side of the story and have an empathetic understanding of those are human beings over there too. There's a lot involved in making peace. I, I see people in the social media calling for a ceasefire, calling for peace, calling to stop violence. Good. You might make an act, but you haven't solved the problem, because all of those emotions, all of those beliefs that people have, the beliefs that enough violence on the other side will solve it, is all still in place. So you're just moving it down the road for it to blow up later, until you deal with the emotion, the belief system behind it, the trauma that's aggravating the nervous system, people's fight or flight, fear of what the other side will do. No, if you resolve that, you can have peace.
agreed, agreed. It's a deep thing. And there's also a lot of collective stories that kind of like mix and match. If we talk about Israel, Palestine, like you have these collective stories, and each side has to give up or at least be willing to understand the other side's collective story. And that takes some letting go of something you created as part of your identity.
Yes. Yes. That's, and that kind of step you think about, before you could take that step, you have to create an environment so that it's okay to take that step. It's okay for me to, because we want to get to peace. But you're like, we're not ready for that. People are carrying all this around the inside, and people aren't ready to listen to the other side. It's like, let's back it up. It's like, what do we need to have happen before we can listen to the other side and understand them? It's like, we need an environment where we feel safe. I'm not feeling defensive. I don't have to do anything to you. You're not going to do anything to me. We can be calm that way. And now I'll listen enough and long enough to understand your point of view, your experience. What does that mean? That means I've got to listen to you long enough to understand your point of view experience without all my reactive stories, objections, emotional reactions hijacking my mind to reinvest me in my point of view or my belief system's point of view. So I have to have enough control over my own attention to hold my belief systems, my emotional impulses, my trauma responses at bay. That is a feat in itself, to then hear you and understand you and be empathetic to your experience. So listening is an exercise we're not practicing. We're not practicing as a culture, much less as a means to resolve conflict. So you just think about the preparation work that needs to happen for us to listen so that I can understand your side and be empathetic. There's
Absolutely. Be
preparation
able to
work.
observe my own mind.
I have to
Listen and be able to observe my mind.
observe my own mind and not believe its protest reactions and impulses. Refrain.
And I think as humanity, we most don't have the skills to do that. And I
If
think
you look on social media, no, we don't.
no.
People aren't
And I
calling
think
for
that's
that.
some of the challenge
Okay.
is also that yeah, I think each person can be like a force for unity or polarization. And I think that this understanding you present can be a chance for people to become a voice for unity, where you see the whole picture instead of saying right away ceasefire or so the way Israel should defend itself, or just giving these kind of blank statements that kind of like just a 1 or 2 line social media post could really explain something that's much deeper.
Yeah.
That's
And I
kind of a
think
reactive way to handle a situation.
it is, yeah, it's a surface level. Um, and it's naive. And I'll tell you, in my past, absolutely my self-importance, I would have proposed such things, you know,
Me too.
uh, a superficial, if you just do what I say, everybody will be fine, stop doing that and do what I think you should do. I like the amount of self-importance one has to say all those other people, shouldn't be behaving the way they are and they should behave the way I think they should behave. Like the the self-importance to think that I have the answer to everybody's problems, and the naive aspect to think that uh, it would work is silly because I'm just blinded by not understanding the layers and not acknowledging the layers of emotion, belief systems, and trauma in the nervous system that are driving this.
And that's even at the high level of even more even maybe the people in charge of solving these things don't understand them.
Correct. Correct. Well, if you think about the leaders, even if a leader would have this, well, we need to solve it at this whole human trauma level that's fighting for survival. That's not the popular thing to say. And if they say it, the people who are in their belief system camps will dismiss them. They're going to react. Their belief system is going to protest. That leader that might have a deeper understanding of the layers of trauma and what really needs addressed for peace and people get along, the reactive belief system camps will dismiss and shout that down. And because the larger group is marching along by its story, right? So if he wants to stay popular, stay in power, he has to appease his people, which means he's going to speak to the loudest sometimes voices or the majority voices, which may not be the consciously aware. It may be the belief system, I'm going to hurt you and break, until you do what I say, conflict continuation policy. Because that's what it is. It's a conflict continuation policy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But a leader is sometimes a person. Well, I would say on that that's not really a leader, but we use the term leader,
Leader.
is a person who is the speaker of that belief system, because they're running out in front of it with the microphone. But it doesn't mean they're leading consciously or for a better society or for an actual solution. They're just the
No.
voice of that large belief system in the narrative, right? And when they're not that voice, that person gets kicked out and somebody else comes to the front and grabs the microphone. So it's
Yeah.
not necessarily the a person in front with a microphone that's leading a new direction or has a peace plan. They're just speaking the narrative that's supported,
Yeah. They're
which
usually
is,
one of the more traumatized people. That's why they're there.
if you see a really self-important person, it's their history and they're traumatized, they're compensating, they're fighting the hardest because their aggression is the strongest because they are carrying the biggest victim beliefs and emotional wounds and fears.
Yeah.
And you can see that say in Russia. Putin was bullied as a kid. He was traumatized.
I think he was more than bullied.
He was yeah.
Probably more than bullied.
So his compensating strategy to being bullied, being afraid of other people, you know, takes judo, goes to the KGB, puts himself in positions of power to have control over others, you know, but he's not at peace.
Mm.
So you see the victim again becomes the perpetrator. And that's just repeated over time, back and forth.
Mm. So
So
how does one, for you, find peace in that? That's, I think, at least we can resolve we can resolve a lot of our relationship conflicts. We can definitely resolve the conflict with ourselves. Like, let's say, I'll give you a personal example. When I look at the situation here, I see two sides whose leaders have policy that perpetuates violence on both sides. So I'm like, this doesn't look like it will get better. Even when this stops, it's likely to continue unless there's a serious leadership change on both sides, which I don't know if will happen.
yeah.
So how does one find peace and understanding, okay, like that might continue for a few dozen years?
Was so are you asking me to come up with a solution to the conflict there? What needs
No,
to
no,
be
I
done?
mean inner peace. No, no, a peace for a person
How do you make
who, as an individual,
okay.
with the fact that these things are kind of beyond our individual control. We can make an influence.
Well, what's in a person's belief system that they would be in conflict with what's going on? What kind of conflict is internally what's happening with them internally that they're not at peace with what's going on, right? So it's probably either going to be angry at one side or the other, angry at a certain group of human beings, afraid of some human beings, uh, feeling a righteousness or a victim sense of injustice. All of those have maybe trauma from the past, certainly emotions and belief systems to them, to generate the stories, the narrative, the thoughts that loop us and keep us there. So for a person who's not at peace with it, what's the narrative thought? What's the emotions that are generating in that narrative story? What's the belief system under it? Like, what do you want to do about it?
Okay. Taking responsibility for your reaction about whatever's happening.
Yeah. What is, because, and you go to Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning and the Stoicism, you go, okay, there's an event. It's an event. And then there's your response story about the event. Okay. Because if you look at like, okay, the human beings killing other human beings event that happened, and I phrase it this way so we don't take a side, right? So we can look at what's underneath the side part of it. So human beings killed some other human beings and mistreated their human beings. Somebody is going to go to compassion. They're going to understand, wow, both sides have been trapped in this narrative cycles of generational trauma and emotion and belief system, trying to solve it with their childhood belief systems of aggression and oppression. And they've been trapped in that level of consciousness and beliefs on both sides, and understand, say, a Buddhist point of view. It's like, yeah, they're suffering. These human beings are suffering on both sides, and understand the pain they're in and the trap they're in, believing those narrative stories. And so one person's response is compassion for both sides. Somebody else's response, anger at the injustice of it. Somebody else's response, fear, sadness, depression, hopelessness, the victim perspective at the event. The event's the same, but different people from a different point of view with a different belief system generates different emotional responses about the event that happened. Someone compassion, someone else anger, somebody else fear and depression, hopelessness. Okay.
Mm.
Somebody else from another point of view, isn't even, acknowledging the suffering, sees it in this timeline of lifetimes, and kind of like, yeah, this is what humans do.
Yeah. Somebody could be numb
They're
and
out
indifferent.
there, yeah, can kind of be like, yeah, this is what's going to happen when you're playing out this dreams and collective consciousness in humanity. It can just kind of be, yeah, it is what it is. Not that they don't care, not that they don't see the pain, but they're like, well, I'm not going to make a story about it, because that's just going to add to the injustice and the anger that feeds the cycle, right?
Absolutely.
See the person who's in compassion or just acknowledgement, acceptance of it, is not adding fuel of anger or fear that feeds the cycle of aggression and victimization. So you say, what does a person do to make peace with what's happening there? Well, you have to move out of your story, which is generated by a belief system. You have to release the emotion, move your point of view to one of, say, compassion and understanding for these deeper layers that are driving the humans. If you just look at the human behavior, well, that doesn't make any sense. That's stupid. It's easy to have judgments. that's unnecessary, this is unjust. But if you see what's driving the human and you understand these layers, then you go, well, of course they're behaving that way. This is what's driving them. And now with that understanding, you can let go of your story that it should be any different. You can drop the expectation, because that's one of the real pivotal beliefs that keep people trapped. Oh, it should be peaceful. If this group of human beings just did this, there would be peace. Or this group of human beings didn't do that, there would be peace. There's this expectation that